John slammed Primus against the wall, his calloused hand gripping the Arcturian's suit collar. "Don't fuck with me. I'll fix your tin can, but only if I get to poke around the insides. Deal?" Primus choked, his scaled hands scrabbling at John's wrist. The human's sweat and grime-streaked face loomed inches from his own, grey eyes hard as hull plating. Primus nodded frantically. John released him with a shove. "Good. Now let's see this fancy ship of yours." He turned and strode out of the cluttered workshop, boots clanging on the grated floor. Primus straightened his collar with a shaking hand and hurried after the mechanic, heart pounding. His shuttle waited in the docking bay, a gleaming silver arrowhead stark against the station's rusted bulk. John let out a low whistle as they approached, eyeing the sleek lines and glowing blue engines. "Damn, you Arcturians don't fuck around." He ran a hand along the smooth hull, leaving a smear of engine grease. Primus winced, but said nothing. The human was his only hope of making the summit in time. If he failed to secure the trade deal, his people would starve. Their crops had failed, and their supplies dwindled with each passing day. John hit the hatch release and ducked inside, Primus close on his heels. The human's eyes widened as he took in the gleaming consoles and holographic displays. "Holy shit!" He cracked his knuckles. "Let's see what this baby can do." John punched the throttle, sending the sleek Arcturian shuttle hurtling through the void. Primus gripped his seat, eyes wide as streaks of light blurred past the view screen. "Hold on to your scales, buddy. We got company." John jerked the controls hard to port, just as a barrage of missiles streaked by, barely missing them. Primus gaped at the chaos erupting outside, two massive fleets pounding each other with everything they had. Fighters swirled and explosions bloomed against the starscape. "Are you insane? We need to get out of here!" John just grinned, banking the ship into a steep dive that had Primus's stomach lurching. No way, this is the perfect chance to see what this baby can really do. The human's hands flew over the controls with surprising skill, sending them corkscrewing through the maelstrom of fire. Primus watched in disbelief as John somehow anticipated every shot, every missile, slipping through gaps in the onslaught that should have been impossible. Maybe the human wasn't quite as reckless as he'd thought. Primus had to admit, the man knew how to fly. He was just starting to relax when a bone-rattling impact slammed him against his restraints. Alarms howled and red lights flashed. "Hull breach, deck 2, engines losing power," John called over the din, hands still moving. Primus started to panic, but John was already up, grabbing tools and sprinting aft. "Keep her steady," he yelled as he vanished into the smoke. Primus stared after him. Keep her steady? Was he serious? He reached for the controls with shaking hands, trying to remember his basic flight training. It was all he could do not to send them careening into a stray torpedo. Terrifying minutes crawled by, the ship shuddering and groaning around him. Finally, mercifully, John reappeared, face streaked with sweat and grease. "All right, patched her up best I could. Won't hold forever, though. We need to—" He broke off, leaning forward to peer at a readout. "Son of a bitch. Civilian transport dead ahead looks like they took a bad hit." Primus followed his gaze to the crippled ship, lurching through the firefight. "We have to help them." John shot him a look. "Thought you wanted to run and hide?" Primus set his jaw. Maybe this human madness was rubbing off on him. "I changed my mind. Take us in." John flashed a fierce grin and sent them hurtling towards the stricken vessel, juking and spinning to evade the crossfire. Primus found himself marveling at the sheer audacity of it. This human was either the bravest soul he'd ever met or completely cracked. Maybe both. With a teeth-rattling thud, they slammed into the transport's docking port. John was out of his chair in an instant, hitting the hatch controls. "I'll get 'em. You keep the engine hot." Then he was gone, magnetic boots clanging on the outer hull. Primus gripped the stick and tried not to think about the missile lock alarms blaring from every console. Long minutes crawled by, ship shaking around him as near misses buffeted the weakening shields. Just as Primus was sure they were dead, the airlock light flashed green. John tumbled through in a gaggle of wide-eyed refugees, alien faces pale with fear and awe. "Punch it," the human roared. Primus wrenched the throttle open and the ship leapt forward, engines screaming. The stars blurred into lines of light as they rocketed away from the carnage. A dozen voices raised in ragged cheers behind them. Primus sagged back in his chair, hardly believing they'd made it. He glanced over at John, who was comforting a sniffling alien child with surprising gentleness. The human met his gaze, lips quirking. "Not bad, Tin Can. Guess you do have some guts in there after all." Primus rolled his eyes, trying to hide a smile. Crude and reckless, but he couldn't deny it. John had come through when it mattered. Maybe this partnership wasn't such a terrible idea after all. John guided the battered Arcturian shuttle into the station's docking bay, the refugee ship they'd rescued close behind. As the airlock cycled and they stepped out onto the deck, a dozen station crews swarmed them, blankets and medical kits in hand. John stepped back, letting them work. He turned to Primus. "Let's see what the damage is." They made their way to the rear of the ship, Primus's face tightening as he saw the scorch marks and torn metal. John popped a panel and stuck his head inside, letting out a low whistle. "Damn. Looks like that missile fragged your quantum core. Reactors shot to hell." Primus sagged against the hull. No, this can't be happening. I have to get to that summit. My people are counting on me." John clapped him on the shoulder. "Hey, we ain't dead yet. I got an idea." He ducked into the ship, rummaging through the cargo hold. "Your fancy ship's dead in the water, but I might be able to rig something with human tech. Gonna need to gut one of our fusion reactors, though." Primus stared at him. "You want to put human technology in my ship?" John shrugged. "You got a better idea? Way I see it, it's that or float around out here until you miss your big meeting." Primus sighed, shoulders slumping. "Very well, do what you must." As John worked, elbow-deep in wires and humming reactor components, Primus found himself pacing the cramped confines of the ship. The human's rough confidence was reassuring, but doubt gnawed at him. Would this gamble pay off, or would he be stranded, his people left to starve? "So what's the deal with this summit, anyway?" John asked, voice muffled behind a panel. "Must be pretty important for you to risk your neck like this." Primus hesitated, then found himself talking, the words spilling out. He spoke of his world, once verdant and thriving, now choked by famine, of the trade deal he hoped to secure, a lifeline for his people. In turn, John shared his own stories as he worked, close scrapes and daring repairs, the thrill and danger of life on the fringes of civilized space. Primus listened, fascinated despite himself. For all their differences, maybe they weren't so dissimilar, both fighting for something bigger than themselves. Hours turned into days as they limped through space, the ship shuddering around the jury-rigged reactor. Primus found his initial distaste for the human fading, replaced by a grudging respect. For all his rough edges, John had a good heart. The console pinged, jolting Primus from his musings. A distress beacon coming from a nearby Arcturian colony. His heart seized as he read the message. A pirate raid in progress, civilians in danger. He looked up at John, who was already sliding into the pilot's seat, face grim. "What do you want to do? Your call." Primus closed his eyes. His people were waiting, the summit just days away. But how could he turn his back on a colony in need? He set his jaw and opened his eyes. "Take us in. We have to help." John nodded sharply and gunned the engines, arrowing towards the distress beacon. Primus gripped his chair as they dropped out of warp, the besieged colony growing in the view screen. A bolt of fear lanced through him as a massive ship swung into view, bristling with guns. A pirate frigate, far outclassing their small shuttle. John swore colorfully, hands flying over the controls. "Strap in and hang on, this is gonna get bumpy." The pirate ship opened fire, lances of energy scourging past them as John sent them into a wild corkscrew. Primus found himself marveling at the human's sheer audacity, even as terror clawed at his throat. This was insanity. But as they hurtled towards the beleaguered colony, darting and juking through a hail of fire, Primus found a strange calm settling over him. Live or die, they were doing the right thing. He glanced over at John, jaw set in concentration as he wove an impossible path through the onslaught. A smile tugged at Primus's lips. He couldn't think of anyone he'd rather have at his side in this mad charge. The pirate ship loomed before them, guns swiveling to lock on. John's hands tightened on the controls, eyes narrowed to steely slits. "All right, you bastards, let's dance." John's hands flew over the controls, brow furrowed in concentration. The pirate frigate loomed on the view screen, bristling with enough firepower to vaporize their tiny shuttle a dozen times over. "Well, we're proper fucked now, ain't we?" John muttered, jaw clenched. Primus gripped the armrests, scales paling. "We have to run, we can't possibly fight that thing." John shot him a sidelong grin. "Who said anything about fighting?" His fingers danced over the console, pulling up schematics. "I got an idea. If I can rig the comms array to emit a focused EM pulse, might be able to knock out their systems. Buy us some time." Primus leaned in, eyes widening as he studied the readouts. A localized ionic feedback loop. Yes, I see. His own hands joined John's, refining the calculations with dizzying speed. Adjust the frequency modulation here and boost the power output. Shoulder to shoulder, fingers flying, they worked in tandem. Two minds, human and Arcturian, bent towards a single purpose. With a final keystroke, John sat back. That ought to do it. Hang on to your scales. He punched the throttle, sending them hurtling towards the pirate ship. The frigate swung to meet them, guns charging with an ominous hum. "Steady," John breathed, hands hovering over the pulse controls. The hull shuddered as a warning shot screeched past. "Steady!" Primus found himself holding his breath, every muscle coiled tight. The pirate ship filled the screen, looming like a predator. "Now!" John slammed the controls, a shuddering pulse bursting from their array. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the pirate ship's lights flickered, engines sputtering and dying. It listed in space, dead in the void. "Ah!" John crowed, already angling them towards the stricken ship's docking port, like kicking the plug on a kitchen appliance. Primus sagged back, a giddy laugh bubbling in his throat. "I can't believe that worked." John flashed him a wink as he brought them in to dock. "Stick with me, Tin Can, I'm full of surprises." The ship clanged as the docking clamps engaged. John was up in a flash, sidearm in hand. "All right, let's go say howdy." Primus swallowed hard and followed, heart pounding as the airlock hissed open. The pirate ship's corridor stretched before them, dimly lit and ominously silent. They crept forward, John in the lead, hugging the walls. A scuff of boots, a glint of metal. "Don't move!" A dozen pirates materialized from the shadows, weapons trained on them. John froze, slowly raising his hands. A figure pushed to the front, heavily scarred and gripping a wicked rifle. The pirate leader. "Bold of you, attacking a Dyraxian frigate? Stupid, but bold." His eyes narrowed. "Drop the gun, and maybe we'll settle for just taking your ship." John glanced at Primus, a question in his eyes. Primus stepped forward, hands spread wide. "Please, we mean you no harm. I am Primus, an Arcturian diplomat. We intercepted your attack on the colony and thought—" He trailed off, really looking at the pirates for the first time. Their clothes were ragged, faces gaunt, scars and burns, some barely healed. These were not the flashy marauders of the holovids. The leader spat. "Thought you'd play hero, swoop in and save the day?" He gestured at his crew, lip curling. "Take a good look, diplomat. You see any heroes here? We're just trying to survive." Primus's heart clenched. He'd seen eyes like that before in refugee camps and war zones, the hollow stare of those with nothing left to lose. He made a decision. "You're from Zephyros, aren't you? The Civil War." The leader stiffened, eyes going wide. "How did you—" Primus forged on. "We can help you, asylum, aid, a chance at a new life if you'll let us." Silence stretched, taut as a wire. The leader stared at Primus, searching his face. Behind him the pirates shifted uneasily. "And why should we trust you?" the leader asked at last, voice raw. Primus met his gaze steadily. Because I give you my word. As an Arcturian and as someone who has seen too much suffering, please, let us help. Another beat. Then the leader lowered his gun. Stand down. He looked back at Primus, something like hope kindling in his eyes. We'll talk. As the pirates warily lowered their weapons, John let out a low whistle. Smooth. You ever consider going into politics? Primus shot him a wry look. Shut up and fix the damage from your pulse. I have a feeling we're going to need this ship. John sketched a mock salute, already moving towards the bridge. Aye, aye, Captain. One pirate ship coming right up. As Primus turned back to the pirate leader, mind already racing with plans and possibilities, he felt a smile tug at his lips. He'd boarded this ship expecting a fight, but maybe, just maybe, they'd found something better, a chance to make a real difference. It was going to be one hell of a diplomatic meeting. The massive Arcturian space station loomed ahead, a gleaming behemoth against the starry backdrop. John let out a low whistle as he guided the ship towards the docking bay. Gotta hand it to you, Primus. Your people sure know how to build 'em big. Primus managed a tight smile, his scales still pale from their harrowing encounter with the pirates. It's one of our largest diplomatic hubs. Normally I'd be thrilled to show you around, but given the circumstances... His words trailed off as a klaxon blared through the ship's speakers. Red lights flashed on the console. John frowned, fingers flying over the controls. We've got company. A whole damn fleet, looks like. Primus leaned forward, eyes widening as he saw the formation of Arcturian military ships bearing down on them. This doesn't make sense. Why would they... Unidentified vessel. This is Captain Zyrax of the Arcturian Defense Force. A stern voice crackled over the comms. You are harboring a fugitive wanted for treason and espionage. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. Treason? Espionage? What the hell are they talking about? John demanded, even as he raised their shields and primed the engines for evasive maneuvers. Primus shook his head, a sinking feeling in his gut. I think they're talking about you, John. Allowing a human access to our technology, it's strictly forbidden. They must have found out about the reactor. John's jaw tightened. So what, they're going to blow us out of the sky for fixing your ship? I won't let that happen. Primus squared his shoulders and opened a channel. This is Ambassador Primus. There's been a misunderstanding. The human is no spy. He's a friend who saved my life. We seek an audience to explain. There was a crackle of static, then... Ambassador Primus, you are ordered to turn over the human for interrogation and imprisonment. Failure to comply will mark you as a collaborator. This is your final warning. Primus slumped back, despair etched on his face. John reached over and gripped his shoulder. Hey, it's going to be okay. We'll figure this out. Primus shook his head. No, John, I can't let you suffer for my mistakes. I'll tell them the truth, make them understand. And if they don't listen... I'm not letting you throw away your life for me. John's eyes were fierce, determined. Here's what we're going to do. I'll surrender. Go with them quietly. Buy you some time to work this out through official channels. John, no, I can't ask you to... So you're not asking, I'm offering. John's grip tightened. Primus, you've got a real chance to make a difference. Those refugees, they need you. Your people need you. Let me do this. Primus blinked back sudden tears, humbled by the human selflessness. I'll come for you, I swear it. No matter how long it takes, I'll make this right. John flashed a crooked grin. I know you will. He reached for the comms, voice steady as he spoke. This is John, the human. I surrender myself into your custody. The military ships closed in, docking clamps latching onto their hull with a shudder. John stood, squaring his shoulders as the airlock hissed open. A dozen Arcturian soldiers poured in, weapons trained on him. John raised his hands, stepping forward slowly. Primus surged to his feet. Wait! The soldiers tensed, but John waved them off, turning back to face Primus. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, 1,000 unspoken words passing between them. Thank you, John said at last, his voice rough with emotion. For everything. It's been one hell of a ride. Primus clasped his hand, pulling him into a fierce embrace. "I will find a way to free you," he whispered. "I swear it on my life." John returned the embrace, then pulled away, a small smile on his face. "I know. Until then, you give 'em hell in those fancy diplomatic meetings, yeah?" Primus managed a watery chuckle. "I will. Farewell, my friend." Then the soldiers were pulling John away, snapping restraints around his wrists. Primus could only watch, heart twisting, as they marched him out of sight. In the weeks that followed, Primus threw himself into his work with a ferocity that surprised even him. He called in every favor, pulled every string, working tirelessly to prove John's innocence. He brought the refugees they'd saved to the capital to testify on John's behalf, telling the story of his bravery and compassion. But the military wouldn't budge, embarrassed and enraged by the security breach. They painted John as a master spy, a manipulator who had tricked Primus into giving him access to Arcturian secrets. No matter how Primus argued, they wouldn't see reason. The trial was a farce, a predetermined outcome. Primus could only watch, helpless, as John was sentenced to life imprisonment on a distant penal colony. As the guards dragged him away, John caught Primus's eye, holding his gaze. There was no anger there, no blame, just a sort of resigned acceptance and a flicker of something that might have been pride. Primus renewed his vow that day, even as he threw himself into his new cause, fighting for the rights of refugees and other marginalized peoples. He rose through the ranks, earning a reputation as a fierce advocate, a champion for the downtrodden. But he never forgot his promise. Every day he worked to clear John's name, petitioning for his release. It took years, decades even, but Primus never gave up. And then, finally, a breakthrough. New evidence, a change in leadership, and John was granted a pardon. Primus was there to meet him as he stepped off the transport, back on the same space station where their journey began. John was thinner, greyer, his face lined with new scars and old pain, but his eyes were still the same, bright with that indomitable spirit. Primus embraced him, tears flowing freely. They talked for hours, catching up on lost time. John spoke of the hardships he'd endured, the darkness he'd faced. Primus told him of the changes he'd fought for, the difference he'd tried to make. In the end, as they stood together looking out at the stars, Primus realized that they'd both been irrevocably changed by their time together. His once narrow view had been shattered, replaced by a deeper understanding of the complexities of the universe. And John, for all his suffering, seemed to stand a little taller, a little prouder, as if knowing he'd made a difference even from behind bars. "What will you do now?" Primus asked softly, almost afraid to hear the answer. John was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I think I'd like to see some of those refugee colonies you've been helping, see if I can lend a hand." Primus smiled, warmed by the thought. "I think they'd like that very much." They clasped hands one last time, a gesture of friendship, of brotherhood. Then John was turning away, shouldering his pack. "Until next time, Tin Can," he called over his shoulder. "Until next time," Primus echoed. "Safe travels, my friend." And as he watched John walk away, Primus knew that whatever the future held, they would both carry a piece of each other with them, always. A bond forged in the crucible of adversity, tempered by time and distance, but never broken. It was the kind of story they would tell for generations, a tale of two unlikely friends who changed each other, and maybe, just maybe, changed the universe along the way. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.